Alright, doing another reaction. I saw this video earlier this week. Um, what was it like? Yeah, like 9 days ago it came out. So I thought I didn't like watch it, but I saw it on my thumbnails or whatever that was on, and it looked interesting. And I put it on this, my watch later playlist. And then I noticed yesterday one of my favorite channels, Vlogging Through History. They do a lot of fun history actions, and he does his own sort of history stuff. He has a very cool channel. I highly recommend checking him out. He's a fairly decent sized channel, almost 500,000 subscribers, especially for like a history channel. Doing what he's doing, like he's doing pretty good. This channel though was just had started out like I think it was 150 subscribers, 57 subscribers. That's I thought about, like I said, I thought about doing it, but I hadn't gotten around to it. Um, Now this channel has over 2,000 subscribers just after this, after vlogging through history. So like, it's just a fun little side note just to show that sometimes reactions, aren't bad, and especially in the right context can do good. So this channel has hugely benefited from a good sized channel of of the right genre, you know, like I said, that's what I'm saying. Like these interactions can be positive or negative. So I don't, some people say, oh, the reactions are all negative. Some reactions can add. They can add value, especially for like a new upcoming channel. If they do something good, some channel like this can, like vlogging through history can use that. And I'm sure I haven't watched it reaction yet. I could even react to both and do like a meta, you know, double reaction, and one being like part of it being a meta reaction. But I might do that as a separate video. I don't know. Um, but yeah, for sure, I wanted to do this one. So I wanted to react at least to the original, and because vlogging through history, like I said, would probably would probably be a good take on it. Probably a way better take than I would, because he actually knows his history and stuff way more. I'm just, I'm a poli sci person, so there's a political aspect of it I can understand, but you know, I went to college. I'm somewhat educated.
So, I often see in online political discourse people bringing up points from decades or even centuries ago in an attempt to make their modern political party that they identify with seem like they were always on the right side of history. Abraham Lincoln ran as a Republican in the 1860s. Of course, he would still support their modern Republican platform. No, the party switched in the mid 20th century. He would obviously be in line with Democrat policies in the modern era. I do think this happens frequently on both sides of the political aisle, and it's pretty obvious why. People feel stronger than ever about party identification and cherry pick historical anecdotes or platforms to fit their own personal confirmation bias. I think we've all been guilty of this at one time or another.
Sure. I
Associating
mean, who
political
doesn't do
figures of
that,
the
right?
distant past with modern ideology doesn't really work for a variety of reasons, chief among them being that the political parties of today just aren't the parties of 150 years ago, to put it
Right.
simply. In today's video, I want to re-examine the history of American two-party politics through the lens of the seven-party systems theory. This is a pretty broadly accepted way to categorize things among the historical
I
community.
think I've heard
If you
about
even
that
go
theory.
on the United States political party's Wikipedia article, there's a full breakdown of them, but there's
Right,
surprisingly little
right, right.
content on
Yeah,
YouTube
yeah.
explaining this idea, so that's what I'm trying to aim to accomplish today. The closest I could find was this video from Crash Course History,
Oh yeah,
but it's
I
almost
remember
10 years
watching
old
that
now,
video.
and since
Solid.
that video has come out, we have
I
entered
mean,
a
I
new
don't
party
remember. It's
system.
been
So,
almost a
what
decade
defines a
ago,
party
but it's
system?
solid.
These 7 time periods all begin with a significant change in how the two major American political parties
Right.
ran their platforms. It's usually one party making a big change at first, and then the other will adapt to reflect an opposition to that. The most obvious and dramatic example.
And not to get. I mean, it's only not yeah. Just to not get too far into it, but yeah, like I think so far everything this guy's saying is pretty on point, and I feel honestly like I've probably been guilty. I mean, yeah, he's right. I think we've all been guilty. I mean, we want to be on the right side of history, but I don't think that's. I mean, that's not the worst thing. That's not a bad impulse. It's all about how are we doing it, right? How are we going about it? As long as we're intellectually honest with ourselves and uh, willing and being humble and understanding, about what we do and don't know in this world. I think that's always the biggest thing. That's always the hardest thing to do, especially because when we have this certain sense of like, oh, this thing going on is wrong, or oh, this thing needs to happen because that's what's right. And politics becomes a lot of that, and a lot of using force to make that happen, but through the state. But yeah, I've heard very familiar with this. I'm somewhat familiar with this idea of these different eras, and yeah, pretty. I think it was. I would almost say it's pretty. This isn't. Yeah, I don't think anything definitely controversial or anything. So this isn't like some edgy take by any stretch of the imagination. I wouldn't say.
Of this is the third party system, where the Republican Party first formed as an anti slavery coalition, and the mainstream Democratic Party strongly opposed that to the point of
Right,
seceding
right,
from
right.
the Union
Yeah,
and
slavery
forming
was
the
definitely that
Confederate
issue.
States
I
of
mean,
America, which of course resulted in the American Civil War. Historians generally agree that this has happened 7 times in American history, but there are alternative timelines that have been proposed, breaking American history into greater or fewer amounts of party systems. For simplicity's sake, we'll just be looking at the mainstream 7 in today's video, and without further ado, let's
okay.
get started at the very beginning.
I don't mind simplicity. It's like like you say,
The
there's
first
other
party system began in
timelines.
1792
I'm sure
and
comment
was
below
defined
which
by the
ones you
rivalry
prefer.
between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, who were also briefly known as the Anti-Federalists. For each party system
Yep.
I cover in this video,
This is
I'm
pretty
going to pick a main
standard. Like
character of each
this
party
is like a
to
pretty.
try and help
I
you
can
guys
see
get a
why
broad understanding of the type of
vlogging
platform each party
reacted to
was
this
running on
video.
during that era.
Oh.
Of course, keep in mind that party politics over the course of 30 plus.
Let me adjust this real quick. Thing get in the way. See that the Federalists, anti-Federalists, Alexander Hamilton, Jefferson.
Plus years can't necessarily be consolidated into the ideas of one person,
DNC,
except
like,
for maybe the seventh party
2016.
system, but we'll get to that later. But I think picking a main character for each
Right,
party at the
2020
time will be
or-
useful in getting a feel of what the
No,
parties
2020
represented
was
at
there,
different
though.
points in American history. So
Derp.
the Federalists, as you might have been able to tell by the name, were in strong support of a federal government. Their
Right.
founder was Alexander Hamilton, who was an easy pick for the main character of this party at the time. Hamilton was a very ideologically motivated man, and a lot of that manifested itself in his political party, with the national bank that he founded
all
being
sounds
a
about right
defining
to me,
issue
too.
of the time.
Oh,
The
now I'm
Federalists
getting in the
also
way.
supported strong ties with Great
I am unfortunately getting in the way of this. So I'm gonna do this. I'll be in the middle here. I'm just in the middle, man. I'm not one of these, one of this. I'm in the middle. No, not trying to be symbolic or anything. Just trying to be out of the way. But anyways.
Britain, and wanted to stay as far away from the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars as possible. On the flip side, you had the
Which is
Democratic
fair.
Republicans, and a consistent
I mean, you
theme
gotta
in
think
this
about
video
from
is that
Hamilton's
everything I
point
list
of
for the
view.
first
Like,
party's
yeah,
platform in each system
neutrality
will
from
be
the
pretty
worst.
much the opposite when I list the policies of the second. So, as you might imagine, they advocated for a weaker federal government, opposed the National Bank, supported France in their revolution, although that support did fade during the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and were generally more favorable
That's a
towards
fair point.
slavery, although that wouldn't be a dominating issue in the first party system. Thomas Jefferson
Yeah.
is another easy pick for the main guy of this time period, representing the Democratic Republicans. Jefferson
Can
were
we go
favorable
back
towards slavery,
to
although that wouldn't be a
I think this. I mean, I think there's a lot more other points and bullet points you could add, but these are some pretty important bullet points. So, like, if I was like teaching like a course in like American history or something, like this is definitely like and trying to or like American course and like the history of the American political system. This is definitely these are some good bullet points for sure. Each of these are very, very important, I think, and. But like you said, like the less restrictive on slavery, that was an aspect of a point later on, and supportive of France, that kind of wanes after Napoleonic War, like you said. Uh, but yeah, like I don't know. For me personally, I'm very sympathetic with anti-federalists when it comes to being anti-national bank and having strong state governments. But I'm sympathetic when it comes to trade with Great Britain, and I mean. Initially, the revolution with
issue of the
France,
first party
ideally, I
system.
get it,
Thomas
but like,
Jefferson is
it became
another
too
easy
messy.
pick for the main guy of this time period, representing the Democratic
So-
Republicans this time. He was the de facto leader of the party during his 8 years in office, and continued to have significant political and party platform
As a
influence
human being,
afterwards.
he was,
Now,
definitely
one thing
flawed,
I do want to
but
mention early on here is that when
as
I
a
list
founding
out these
father,
party
he's
platform
undeniable.
ideas, they don't apply to everyone in the party.
I think that's
Different
what
wings
both of them
parties
are.
have existed for as long as America itself. And for a modern example, think of how progressive Democrats like AOC and Bernie Sanders openly disagree with the more mainstream moderate Democrats on plenty of issues. So
Right.
when I say something like Democratic Republicans were generally more accepting of slavery, the word generally is doing some heavy lifting there, because there
Right.
were, of course, plenty of Democratic Republicans, especially in the North, that were staunchly opposed to the idea of slavery, but agreed with the mainstream
Right.
party lines on other issues.
Right,
So
right,
please
right.
keep in mind the nuance and diversity within the parties
course.
themselves. These
I
aren't
think I'm glad that
monolithic
he's bringing
entities
this sort of
with mindless
points
drones
up.
that agree with them on every last issue.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyways, the first party system lasted about 30
I'm
years.
really happy you brought that all up because that is important to remember. Like it is like there's nuance upon nuance upon nuance upon nuance with all this stuff, and so you gotta remember back then things were just as probably textured and nuanced, or as it is now with issues. And politics is always like messy like that, especially with democracies. That's just kind of part of the beast. I mean, admittedly, there's a little weirdness to it. I mean, I get it. It's supposed to not be moderate in our bias, but you gotta admit, there's something weird to like, especially like the slavery and stuff. We're supposed to pretend like, oh no, these are human beings that we're just all saying is property. And we're just supposed to pretend like that. It's like, it's like, oh, that's just the times. So, even though people back then realized like, no, these are human beings. We shouldn't own them. Even if they had like, even if like outright racist bigots, they could still be like, yeah, I don't believe you were equals. Like, I think I'm superior as a white man, but like, I still don't think you should be like. There's still people who are like that, you know. So like, I don't know. I don't. I always am a little weird. That I think it's not as strong of an argument as people like to think it is. But that's
years and began to transition into the second system after the War of 1812. From roughly 1815 to 1824, the time period in American history known as the Era of Good Feelings occurred, which was mainly defined by James Monroe's presidency and the decline of the Federalist Party. This was probably the period in American history with the least political disagreement, and the public
that's why it's called Era of Good
strongly
Feelings.
with the Democratic-Republican Party platform, which led to the
But
Federalist.
if you're certain, categories of individuals, that was not the Era of Good Feelings. That's why it's like,
1824 was the dawn of a new
age. An era where slavery existed. You can't.
Unhappy with the leadership of the
Just by
Democratic
definition.
Republicans
Anyway,
and
once
believing
again,
the
anyways.
1824 election was unfairly taken from him by his rival John Quincy
And
Adams,
also,
created a new splinter party, the Democrats. The Democrats,
doing
under the
native.
leadership of Andrew Jackson, would mount one of the greatest political comebacks in history, winning the 1828, 1832, and 1836 elections. As is the case with every party system, some of the issues of the previous one made their ways into the platforms of the successors. In this case, the National Bank was still a hotly contested issue with the Democrats opposing it, and their new rival party, the Whigs, favoring it. However, this was a new party system, and of course, with it came new issues. Corruption became a topic in the front and center of the political conversation, with Jackson being the first president that could truly be considered an outsider, and he heavily posed the idea of elitist politics and the spoils system. Jacksonian Democrats also believed in limiting the power of the government, manifest destiny, or the idea of expanding the country
he just was
and forcing
Jackson.
Native Americans from their homeland and championing the separation between church and state. This was essentially the earliest form of
driven individual
politics. You might have noticed
I don't think it reminds me of Trump. That's why I get why Trump likes him.
Yet, my pick for their main
you two are pretty similar.
He literally co-created the party with Martin Van Buren and was an extremely popular president during his time period. The Whigs, on the other hand, were a much more loosely organized party that struggled electorally. There's a reason why the Democrats survived and they didn't. They didn't exactly have a party platform of their own. For the most part, they just opposed whatever Jackson and his acolytes were pushing at the time. There were only 2 Whig presidents ever elected, and strangely, they both died in office. The Whigs were an elitist party that was staunchly against the expansion of voting rights for the common man, opposed expansionism, notably with the annexation.
William Harrison, Zachary Taylor.
Against the expansion of voting rights for the common man. The Whigs were an elitist party that were staunchly against the expansion of voting rights for the common man, opposed expansionism, notably with the annexation of Texas, and believed in preserving the national bank.
I'm
picking Henry Clay as the main character of the Whig Party. Sure, he was never president, even though he did run unsuccessfully 3 times, but he was the ideological founder of the party and the glue that held the otherwise weak coalition together. The party basically died when he did, and by the early 1850s, slavery was quickly becoming a defining political issue, which was a problem for the Whigs, because there was almost an equal split of pro-slavery and anti-slavery members in the faction.
Which is something you just can't ignore. Slavery is just something you couldn't ignore.
The third party system began. The Democrats survived, but became fundamentally a different party than the one Andrew Jackson had founded 30 years prior. Because, like I mentioned before, being the pro-slavery party was their bread and butter by this time. Do keep in mind what I talked about earlier with different ideas within parties, though. A major example of this is when primarily Democratic Southern states seceded from the Union.
Imagine, the Democrats like, your political party name survived, but the party that's going to elect the first black president.
Vice President and later President Andrew Johnson. Slavery,
they would be horrified.
And Reconstruction dominated politics during
which
this
is good.
system.
Honestly, it's good.
But it's important to recognize that other issues were in the conversation as well, even if they're mentioned less often. The newly formed Republican Party supported a stronger federal government. The the gold standard, tariffs, expanded civil rights, and the continuation of Reconstruction.
Which
In
is
contrast,
funny.
the Democrats supported
It's funny
slavery
the
and the
gold tariff,
preservation of
considering
states'
Nixon
rights,
would
to
be
the
the
point
one.
where 11
I think it was
Democrat-ran
Nixon, right? The
states
guy I remember.
seceded from the Union and attempted to create their own country, the Confederate States of America.
No,
After the
it's,
Civil War, they were fiercely opposed to the high tariffs imposed by the Republicans, advocated for the end of Reconstruction, the abolishment of the gold standard, limitations on civil rights, which included the beginning of Jim Crow laws,
right, because
and
the
continued to
Democrats
place
were
a
for
bigger
the
emphasis on
abolishment of the
ending
gold
corruption
standard.
than their opposition did, similar to the second party system. Immigration also became a big issue for the first time during the third party system. Sure, it was addressed in the first two, but the idea of nativism became more prominent around this time, or in simpler terms, the idea that native-born citizens of a country should have greater protections and rights compared to immigrants. Towards the end, this era also coincided with the Gilded Age, which was a time defined by rapid industrialization and growth, but also some of the greatest wealth inequality and class warfare that the country had ever seen, setting the stage for issues
other
that
than
would define
now,
the
but
fourth party system. For my main character
well,
of the
now
Republican
it's not
Party
much
during this
better,
time
but
period,
yeah.
it's the easiest pick ever. Of course it would be Abraham Lincoln. Yes, he died in 1865, and this party system lasted until around 1896, but the entire third party system was dominated by Republican politics, and every Republican president during this era just wanted to be a continuation of Abraham Lincoln in one way or another. The Democrat main character was
Yet
a
the
bit
man
harder
was
to
such
pick,
a
but I
had so
ultimately
much
went with
depression
Jefferson
issues,
Davis,
and
who
his
was the
personal
president
life
of the
was so
Confederate
tragic.
States
Yeah,
of
everyone
America,
wanted to
and prior to
emulate
that
him.
was a senator and secretary of war.
It's
You can
kind of
make
hard
the
the
case that
hero's
ideologically
tragedy.
this
A
era
lot of heroes
belonged
are
more to
that way,
Stephen
and Lincoln
Douglas on the
fits that.
Democratic side, but I feel like choosing a Confederate leader, well, the Confederate leader, was the right call because the Civil War was by far the most important event that defined the third party system and what came afterwards. The third party system came to a close in the 1890s when new issues
their
began to
generals are
emerge,
pretty good.
including the Republican
Very
Party expressing a
tactically sound
desire to break
generals.
up monopolies and going in a more progressive
You
direction
know,
overall.
just
Independent voters also became a
Confederates
larger
at that
and larger
losing
group
war.
of Americans as party loyalty diminished in the 1880s and 90s.
And that too.
The fourth party system began in 1896 with the election of Republican William McKinley following a tumultuous second term from Democrat Grover Cleveland. This also marked the beginning of what's referred to as the progressive era of American politics, where the Republican Party began to focus on issues including but not limited to women's suffrage, expansion of child labor laws, and the influence of labor unions, breaking up monopolies, and prohibition, although prohibition was an issue more tied closely to religion than political party. Imperialism also became a hotly contested issue during this era, with the country annexing Hawaii and the Philippines, along with plenty of other smaller territories, many of which were fostered by and popular among the Republicans. Foreign policy went hand in hand with imperialist policies.
Roosevelt is such an
Especially because the
admirable,
fourth party system is where the United States
his
made their presence
tenacity
known on the
and
world
toughness,
stage
but
with
it's,
their involvement in
imperialism,
World
man,
War
like.
I. Woodrow Wilson, who I'm choosing as the main character for the Democrats in this era, fathered
But
many of the foreign policies that America would continue to follow for decades to come, for better or for worse. Wilsonism is the idea that democracy, collective security, and free trade.
Okay. Can you break down his 14 points? Wilson's 14 points. I mean, look. On paper, a lot of this doesn't. Actually, I agree with on paper. Open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, removal of economic barriers, reduction of armaments, adjustment of colonial claims. I mean, adjustments. I would say just free to colonial claims. That's my adjustments. Conquer territories in Russia. Preservation of Bulgarian sovereignty. Sure, why not? Always sovereignty is important of the people. Restoration of French territory. That's like free them. Redrawing of Italian frontiers. Free them. Division of Austria-Hungary. I mean, I think that's what those people wanted, so I'd be okay if that's what the people wanted. And redrawing of Balkan boundaries isn't necessarily bad as long as you do it once again with how the peoples of those areas would prefer it. Limitations on Turkey, well, that's just rude. Establishment of an independent Poland, sure, because, I'm for independent folks. And the creation of an association of nations. And that one's even, depends how you do it. So, you know what I mean? But on practice, we know how Wilson was. And Wilson, yeah.
should be the
He's not
dominating
remembered
cause with
fondly.
American intervention
Even
in foreign
vlogging through
nations.
history, the guy I
And you
mentioned
can
earlier,
absolutely connect the
this
dots
is
on
this
how this led to
Leafberry
certain
guy. I'm
decision
sure
making
during
that would
this
occur in
point has seen
Korea,
Wilson's
Vietnam,
face. He's
Iraq,
just,
Afghanistan, etc. The main character of the Republicans in this era easily goes to Theodore Roosevelt, who many
Right.
consider to be the father of the American progressive movement. Like I mentioned before,
Yeah.
the fourth party system is more commonly called the progressive era, and this was truly kickstarted by Roosevelt and mainly revolved around his policies. And he was effective at it too. Republicans
And then
dominated
you
the fourth
think the
party system
progressive
just like they
era
did with the third,
continued,
and many of
you
the
know, at least
aforementioned
with-
changes that Roosevelt was advocating for came into fruition. The fourth party system came to an end in 1932
Right.
with the election of President Franklin Roosevelt, who was radically different from Democrats that came prior because he planned to
Roosevelt's,
address
man.
the recent Great Depression and the rising tensions in Europe in new and
Think about
unconventional ways compared to the past
go
of
away,
American
go away.
politics.
Yeah, that is crazy to think about. Like two Roosevelts, you know, they're just so bam. Like the Roosevelts are so influential. They're like for two different, right, bam, bam, in terms of being influential and for these different parties eras. And what's crazy is I don't think that's necessarily inaccurate to draw it that way. I like personally, from my personal, like from my studies and everything of it, from what I've understood of it, that seems on point, right? Like, because both of them were just that influential in their own right. I mean, and they're both of this progressive era for sure. So, I mean, you could maybe make the argument they're just both of that one big progressive era. If you want to argue that, I think that's fair too. But either way, very influential.
The fifth party system is also known as the New Deal party system because the
And that's
policies and
interesting. You
platforms
could
were
say
largely
New
defined by
Deal.
support
I would
or
say
opposition for
progressive is a
FDR's New
continuation
Deal
of progressive era
programs, which
potentially.
addressed
But
the
either
economic
way,
depression, the
tomato,
creation
tomato.
of social welfare programs, the continuation of
Okay,
labor rights and
32
unions being
to
expanded,
80. I
the
mean,
United
that's
States
fair.
involvement in World War II
That's
and the
fair.
aftermath, and in the
Because
second
World War
half
II
of
is
this
such
party
a
system, the response to the
yeah,
Cold War and the growing civil rights movement became dominant
yeah.
pillars of the political conversation. The response to
Especially,
the Cold War and the growing civil rights movement became,
es-
and in the second half of this party
yeah, especially when you see that breakdown. Yeah, that seems pretty accurate. That seems pretty accurate.
system, the response to the Cold War and
Oh
the
yeah,
growing civil rights movement
yeah, I can do those. Okay, yeah, that seems really accurate. That seems and so yeah, and that's why you would have to World War II would be that cutting off point for the fourth and fifth era, and it comes from the progressive era, which is then the bedrock and foundation for the New Deal era to happen. And the Roosevelts both, pretty influential. Without them, you probably wouldn't have it, or at least wouldn't have had it in the same way or as soon, and blah 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 blah. So I think that's for sure the case.
became dominant pillars of the political conversation. This party system probably saw the most realignment in American history, with the Democratic Party especially making one of the most radical transitions from one era to another. FDR reshaped the party in his image. Can you guess who the Democrat main character of the fifth party system is yet? Some factions of the Democrats were so disillusioned with the transition in the party that a splinter party, the Dixiecrats, were briefly created in the late 1940s by Senator Strom Thurmond to preserve the past of the old Democrats by opposing the expansion of civil rights and the phasing out of Jim Crow laws. Of course, this party was unsuccessful, and the majority of the anti-civil rights and anti-welfare Democrats realigned into the new Republican Party, which is now concentrating their efforts on smaller government policies as well as economic conservatism. The fifth party system is where you can start to observe the two major parties take shape.
And that kind of continue on to today's Republican Party. So just have it as an FYI. And then that's how Trump was able to, this is the historical ties. So those old Dixiecrat Democrats who had the old ties to the, just anti-civil rights era to, wanting slavery. So it's like all this historical ties, these people, their beliefs, you know, and then others just, luckily over time we've gotten more nuance, and most people have just agreed, like, especially with major things like slavery, at least, like, hey, we can't just outright owe people like a property like this all willy nilly. No, like you can't just do that. I
shaping
mean, I
their
know there's
modern forms.
prisons, you know,
Although there
there's
are
that's
still
a
some
whole other
considerable
issue,
differences
but
between the parties then and the parties now. You don't see mainstream Republicans in
you just
2025
don't have
arguing for
this. You
Jim Crow
can't have
laws to be
explicitly
brought
that,
back,
you
and you don't
know.
see mainstream Democrats in 2025 arguing for the United States to fund more missions to the moon. Anyways, the main
Right.
character for the
That is
Democrats
true.
here is obviously FDR. The entire fifth party system is mostly based around him and his policies, so that's an easy choice. The
Right.
Republicans were a bit harder to pick. I considered Thomas Dewey, who ran against FDR twice, and was a leading voice of opposition to the New Deal programs,
Oh.
while I ultimately went with Richard Nixon because I feel like he best represents the change in Republican policy between the fourth and fifth party systems. Nixon was extremely relevant during this era. He was the vice president
I
for
think that's
8
a good
years
choice.
and was the
That's a really
Republican
good choice.
presidential nominee
I would have been
3
disappointed
times,
if he had not
and was
chosen Nixon.
ideologically a middle-of-the-road standard conservative compared
Especially
to a more
with that
liberal
era,
Republican
that time
like
frame.
Thomas Dewey or Nelson Rockefeller, or a farther right figure like Barry Goldwater. In terms of when the fifth party system ended, historians actually disagree a lot on this one. The answer ranges from 1966 all the way to the early 1990s, but the most commonly agreed upon date is 1980, with the election of Ronald Reagan, who represented a new direction for the Republican Party in contrast to Nixon. I agree with this. The decline of the New Deal coalition of Democrats was gradual, but 1980 was the final nail in the coffin with an absolute rejection of Democratic ideals, where Reagan won in a landslide and the Democrats lost the Senate for the first time in 30 years.
That's interesting, and that is, I think, I don't know when I would say that um it would ended. I don't know. I think all those are very compelling. I don't, you know, I really don't know. I really don't know when I would say that ended. 90s definitely seems way too late. That seems way too late. That seems way, way, way too late. I think, yeah, I think Reagan, the election of Reagan, I think that's the latest you can go. I mean, I'm pretty much I would be open to potentially saying 60s and maybe, but I think Reagan, I think the 80s, that's pretty safe. That's a good safe spot for sure. So I think I agree with everyone else, I guess.
The six party system was the most recent one to end, and I would imagine most people watching this video lived through either some or all of it. The era that began with Reagan's election fostered in a new Republican Party platform of conservative trickle-down
Interesting.
economics, involving significant tax cuts and deregulation. The conversation around foreign intervention also reached an all-time high during this era, with Reagan's government toppling
So we're
pro-communist
just
regimes
now,
in
according
countries
to
like
this
Nicaragua,
theory,
which
we're
eventually coincided with the
just
collapse
okay.
of communism and the end of the
Okay.
Cold War as a whole in the early 1990s. The heavy foreign intervention of the Republican Party continued with Reagan's ideological successors, both George Bush's, with Bush Sr. getting involved in the Gulf War and Bush Jr. starting wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq. The Democrats were staunchly opposed to Reagan's conservative economic system, but were less polarizing on foreign intervention, with Democrats broadly supporting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, at least at first, and approving foreign intervention in countries including Serbia, Bosnia, and Libya during their own administrations
Yep.
under Presidents Clinton and Obama. Democrats also made a
True,
significant
true.
effort for healthcare reform in the six-party system, with the Affordable Care Act signed into law in 2010. Love it or hate it, it's undeniable that the ACA was one of the most significant pieces of legislation in the 21st century so far.
Yeah.
Immigration,
That's
legalization of
facts.
marijuana and gay marriage, technology regulation, and climate change were also important issues candidates ran on during this party system, although I would still say foreign policy was the most dominating issue of them all. For the main character of the Republicans during this era, I have to
Depends
go
on the
with
person,
Reagan.
but yeah.
His policies were a
At least
significant
for me,
change from
I
what came
was
before,
one of my major
and both of the
personal
George
issues.
Bushes followed his template closely and were essentially just extensions of the Reagan presidency. The Democrats were hard to pick
Yeah.
this time around, and I thought for a long time about this one, but I think I'm going to have to give it to Barack Obama. Obama
Right.
didn't necessarily bring a ton to the table in terms of new ideology, but the significance of being elected the first black president of the United States is demonstrative of the diversity that the Democratic Party wanted to promote at the time.
Yep.
Not to mention his savviness with new technology, being the first president to heavily utilize the internet as a campaign strategy. You could, of course, make the argument for Bill Clinton or even Hillary Clinton, but I feel like Obama was more of a culturally significant
Hillary.
figure.
Oh, no
whose
offense to
influences
Hillary,
lasted
she's
longer.
there, but not.
Now, in
It would
terms
have
of
to
the
be
ending
either
of the
Bill
six-party
or
system, there is
Obama.
once again some disagreement on this one. Let's
Yes,
break it down.
I do.
The concept alone of a seventh party.
So before,
In terms of the ending of the six-party system, there is once again some disagreement on this one. Let's break it down.
I'm going to say before he says what their spiel is, I'm going to say 2016. I'm going to say Trump is the beginning of the new era. And look, with the election of Trump, that is when this new seventh era that we are currently living through, as of recording of this video, we are living through right now, and being in 2024. And so now we've been About 8 years in this new era. I would say that. I would say maybe 2020, but I think it's 2016. I think 2024 is a little late. I think it's a little no. I think it's a little too late. But I know. Let's see. I want to see what their arguments are.
The concept alone of a seventh party system is debated among historians and political analysts, with some arguing that we are still in the sixth party system. But when I look at the policies,
No.
rhetoric, and ideology of Donald Trump, I feel like it's just so blatantly obvious that there is a change in direction from the era of Reagan and the Bushes.
Yep.
Hell, Trump has openly criticized the decision making of George W. Bush plenty of times.
Yep.
Most famously saying in 2016 that the Iraq War was a mistake. But okay, let's say that there is a seventh party system that we're currently living in. When did it start? The easy answer is 2016 with the
Yes.
election of Donald Trump, but I don't know if I can get behind that. The first
Why?
Trump administration included plenty of the old guard Republicans from the six-party system,
Eh.
and was immediately followed by the Biden administration, which can just be seen as an extension of the Obama years in a lot of ways. In
I
2024,
suppose.
however, the Republican Party seemed as if it had completed its transition into the Trump Party, with the vast majority of Republican nationally elected officials supporting the MAGA platform, and were specifically backed by President Trump, not to mention his election victory with both the popular vote and the electoral vote. For those reasons, I think I'd say the seventh party system started in 2024, because that election cycle proved that the Trump presidency wasn't just a one-off fluke, and that he and his ideas were here to stay. It's hard to describe major issues of this party system because it's only lasted between 1 and 9 years depending on who you ask. But the things that have been
I don't agree with that. I just think that the even with Trump having been limited in his first term and then not being able to even get reelected during 2020 and having Biden, even though there's that bit of a hiccup there, that's just I think part of the transitionary stuff. And besides, it's not like Biden actually got rid of everything Trump did. I mean, he actually kept some of the stuff Trump was doing. I mean, fortunately, depending on your political beliefs and blah blah blah. But so I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I mean, overall, yes, is Biden kind of continuation of the Obama? Sure. I think in a lot of ways you can say that for sure, policy wise. So all in all, yes. But I don't know. I think as soon as with Trump being, I think even by 2016, he already had control over the Republican Party. He already was the Republican Party by that point. As soon as he won the presidency, it was Jover for that. But
important so far: immigration, identity politics, the dismantling of establishment politics and politicians, transgender rights, foreign trade deals, and the biggest one, which indicates to me that we're in a new party system, is the Republican switch from foreign interventionism, the six-party system, to isolationism and non-intervention under Trump. It's clear that the main character of this party system on the Republican side is Donald Trump. I'd go as far as to say he's caused the biggest shift in the two-party system from any one man since FDR, for better or for worse, depending on how you feel about him. Unless these next 4 years go disastrously wrong for Trump, the 2028 Republican nominee will almost certainly be an ideological successor to him, probably J.D. Vance. And for the Democrats' main character, I'm not picking one yet. If you think the seventh party system started in 2024, we haven't even had any Democrat presidents yet.
right.
And if you think it started in 2016, we've only had Joe Biden, who I think will fade into relative obscurity due to being sandwiched between the two Trump terms
Yep.
and being a pretty unpopular president overall. Love
Yep.
him or hate him, I think we can all admit that it's very unlikely that Biden's policies specifically will shape the Democratic Party going forward for the next 30 years or anything. We've yet to see a politician on the Democratic side truly rise up to the occasion to counter
See,
Trump
this I
and
agree
shape the
with.
party's interests as a result. Will it be Pete Buttigieg, AOC, Andy Bashar, Gavin Newsom, or a dark horse that we haven't heard of yet? No one can say for sure, but
That's
the future
most
of what
likely
the
what's gonna
seventh-party
be, some
system
random
holds
dark
is
horse
sure to be an interesting
that's gonna
one to
be
observe on both
shake
sides. So
stuff
there you
up.
have it, the 7 eras or party systems of American
see.
political
I mean,
history.
with the
I think
Democrats,
framing the
what
history
they
of American
do.
politics in this way provides
Or
a
some
valuable
new
lens
third
to
party will
understand
come
the
through,
evolution
smack
of
the
parties
Democrats
in
out
a
of the
way
way.
that just summarizing the events themselves
Libertarians,
won't necessarily
Greens,
provide. It might
whatever,
seem
you know,
like in the
maybe,
short
yeah,
term,
some
change
random
is
parties
gradual
comes
and slow.
through.
But when you look
Hopefully
at the big
America
picture,
maybe
you can
becomes
really
a
start to
multi-party
understand that the
system.
political parties of
Maybe.
today are fundamentally different than they were
That's what I would say
200,
is the way to
100,
fix all this.
50, or
Quit,
even
like,
20
letting
years
things
ago.
be so
Hopefully this helps you understand my
two-party,
point from the
but-
beginning of the video about how you can't really equate historic figures' politics to the politics of today. This video
Right.
will probably only get a couple hundred views, but hopefully that shuts down at least one online debate on whether George Washington would be a Democrat or Republican if he were alive today. Anyways, what direction do you see the two major parties going in the
First of all,
future?
like,
Thank you so much for watching. This is Based on
2.1K
History, signing off.
likes.
The number one rule in comedy is
Oh, Sorry, wrong video.
centuries ago. And
But yeah, and then look at that, 37,000. Yeah, just because of the vlogging through history. That's so cool. This video's already been. It's going to be already like probably 35 or so minutes by the time I'm done talking. But so as funny as I think it would be to do like a double. Like I said, I might do the reacting to vlogging later, maybe, or I don't know. I might just do that in my own time for fun. Just watch that later for fun. But so yeah, so this was my reaction to this video. Like, please like it, go and like it, all that. I think it's pretty well done. I mean, like I said, my only biggest disagreement is with the seventh era and when it's begun. I would say that's my biggest disagreement, which is pretty dang good. Then I mean, I think it's pretty, and even then, like I understand the argument. I would say no. I would just say this. I think this Trump with 2016, him being elected. Yes, he was much more held back by the remnants of the old guard, and that's what just to prove, like, these transitions are the transitions. They're not so always so like boop. There's a little bit of you know the beginning of one era is going to still have the remnants of the previous one still behind there for a while. So I think that's what's more so what's kind of that's the argument I would make. But other than that, I think everything else sounded pretty on point, pretty accurate from my understanding. Um, Let me know if you all disagree and or if you agree. Either way, I hope you all have a good one. Please like, subscribe, all that stuff to this channel, and have a good one. Peace.